this computer. Okay, so this is another meeting of the Jijang Bosal Book Club. We are meeting on June 13th, Tuesday night, and we're discussing the Ksitigarbha Sutra, continuing our discussion of that. And we're going to begin tonight's class with the Jijang Bosal chant. So I'm going to share my screen and on the screen, if I can find it. Let's see.
Jijang Bosal, 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 Jijang Bosal. Myorokchanjanamoni, Om Paramani Dhani Sabaha, Om Paramani Dhani Sabaha, Om Paramani Dhani Sabaha, Om Shantrijano Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Om, Om Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Om, Om Mamoka, Salvadara Sadaya, Shive Om, Musosotegyo Sandarani, Nam Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Harasa, Sananam Danyata, Om Kaka Kae Kae Hum Hum Avara, Avara 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 Avara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjiga, Shiriye Sabaha, Namu Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Hadasa, Saranam Danyata, Om Kaka Kae Kae Hum Hum Abara, Abara 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 Abara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjiga, Shiriye Sabaha, Namu Samanda Motanam, Abaraji Hadasa, Saranam Danyata, Om Kaka Kae Kae Hum Hum Abara, Abara 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 Abara, Chitta Chitta Chiri Chiri Pada Pada Sanjiga, Shiriye Sabaha, Om Jino Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Om Horo Horo Saya Roke Sabaha, Bonyang Jino Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charma Jagora Barahom, Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charma Jagora Barahom, Om Samara Samara Mimara, Charma Jagora Barahom, Chakshil Chunyonga Suji, Dehe Jungsuka Honjin, Ogongaryang Bungaye, Monong Jinsol, Bul,
So, I can just go right into starting the process of summarizing the sutra, starting from chapter 1. Does anybody have a question or something you want to bring up or talk about, or you just want to hear me go through my slides? Okay, so if anything comes up, you got a question or something that you think of or you do want to bring up, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. Let's see now. So I'm trying to, there we go, slideshow, current slide. And here we are. Now, so chapter 1, the very beginning. And chapter 1 is kind of important in the sutra. It sets a stage and sets a scene. And let me just read what I've put up here, though. The Buddha travels to try to streams of heaven. So that's already an important detail in order to teach his mother, another important detail. So in the first place, the sutra is not being taught on earth. And for the most part, the sutra is not being taught to human beings. Now, the Buddha brought some people with him. I think he did. Actually, I'm not completely clear on this, but for the most part, the people who are there, the beings who are there, The audience of this sutra are non-human beings, and in particular, the Buddha's mother, who died very soon after giving birth to her son, Siddhartha, and has been living in Triastrimsa. Well, actually, she's been living in Tushita heaven ever since then. And the versions, there's different versions of this, but the most common version is that the Buddha's mother was actually living in Tushita heaven, which is a heavenly realm above Triastrimsa heaven. And then she came down to Triastrimsa heaven in order to meet with her son and to receive these teachings. Now, what happens at the very beginning of the very first chapter is that we're told that it is in Triastrimsa heaven, and the Buddha is there in order to give teachings to his mother. And then the Buddha begins, and this is something that happens in a lot of sutras, that there are, let's see, yeah, I can get my, he begins to emit clouds of great light. And the clouds of great light are then described, or at least named in some detail. And a great assembly of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Devas, Nagas, ghosts, spirits, and other beings have gathered. So that gives you an indication of the kind of what some people might call supernatural or supernormal sort of aspect of this sutra, which is pretty pronounced. The Buddha at this point tells Manjushri that all these beings are here because of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Now, Ksitigarbha is not there at this point. Manjushri asked the Buddha to explain this in more detail, and in particular, what practices and vows have enabled Ksitigarbha to accomplish such inconceivable deeds. Now, in response to Manjushri's request, the Buddha first emphasizes that it's been a very long time since Ksitigarbha attained the 10th Bodhisattva level. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, there are 10 levels, 10 stages on the Bodhisattva path before becoming a Buddha. And so long ago, Ksitigarbha had already attained the highest of these Bodhisattva paths. But he took a great vow to remain there and to not become a Buddha until all other beings had attained liberation from suffering. And in the future, all those who hear Ksitigarbha's name, sing his praises, recite his name, make images of him, etc., will have many rebirths, try Strimsa heaven, and never fall into the lower realms. And then the Buddha tells the first two of four stories that are in this sutra about the past lives of Ksitigarbha. And the first story is about a time when Ksitigarbha had been a king. And he had another friend who was a king, and his friend made a vow to become a fully enlightened Buddha in order to save all beings. But that was the vow that Ksitigarbha's friend made. Ksitigarbha made the vow to not become a Buddha, to delay his own enlightenment until he had saved all beings from suffering. So that story is not nearly as famous. The next story that the Buddha tells about Ksitigarbha is the very famous story about the Brahmin girl or Brahmin woman whose mother is saved from hell by the prayers of her daughter, who's the future Ksitigarbha. Oh yeah, so this is just one thing to take note of in the title of this sutra, spiritual powers, or this is where is the word? Oh yeah, here it is. Spiritual powers, or in where do I have the Sino-Korean? I don't have it here. Oh, I have it in an earlier slide. This is the power. This character is the power for Shin, or spiritual, or divine. The second to last character in the title of this chapter, and this is the character for Tong, or power, it's sometimes called. And together, I found this in another book on another sutra in which this phrase appears quite frequently in another sutra called The Secrets of the Tathagata. And this explanation here doesn't really give a complete explanation of this phrase, Shintang. What it does is it shows you just how difficult it is to pin down what the meaning of this phrase is. Here, this translator prefers supernormal powers to. Oh, yeah, Camille, go ahead, unmute yourself, ask something.
I don't mean to like get off topic, but I was just wondering, could you define what Tathagata is? I keep coming across it, and I would appreciate an explanation.
Yes. So Tathagata is the easiest and most important way of understanding it is that it's just another name for a Buddha. Okay. So Buddha and Tathagata can be used interchangeably. There's actually a whole chapter in this sutra on the names of Buddhas. There's 19 different Buddhas who are named, and several of them are called Tathagatas, but several of them are just called Buddhas. Okay, and so beyond that, you get into people talking about the thus come one, whatever a thus come one is. Thus come one who has come thus. And it's a little difficult to pin down exactly what that's supposed to mean. Of course, Buddha means one who is awake, and that has a great variety of meanings. But yes, so the secrets of the Tathagata, so a Tathagata can refer to any fully enlightened being. It's one of the many ways of referring to a Buddha. And a lot more can be said about it than that. But I'm going to leave it at that. And a lot more can be said about this phrase. Actually, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm going to get out of presentation mode just long enough to do a search within this document. Oh, come on. Let me search. Just let me search. Here we go. Copy. And see who's going to let me search. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. I just want to get the pronunciation of this term to have in an earlier slide. Shintang. Shintang in Sino-Korean. Shintang. And here's an earlier slide that I have on this. The phrase Shintang is pretty interesting. It is the key phrase in the poem that goes with the fourth ox herding picture, getting hold of the ox. And then here it is. Here is that verse in the fourth ox herding picture. With the energy of his whole being, the boy has at last taken hold of the ox. Yeah. So here, this is the direct perception of the ox. And so when is this the same shin? No, it's not the same shin. It has something of the same meaning as when you see the phrase sesshin being used to refer to a retreat. It means doing hard practice so that one can directly touch the mind. And so the supernormal or supernatural power that's being discussed in the first chapter of the Ksitigarbha Sutra, and that's also being discussed in the ox herding pictures, is the power to directly perceive the mind perceiving mind directly. All right. Probably spent more time on that than I should have, but oh, here we are. Yeah, all right. So now I do want to spend a minute or two talking specifically about this very famous story about the Brahmin woman who saves her mother. So first detail, because a lot of times people want to get directly to the point where she is transported to the hell realms and has a conversation with one of the beings that lives in the hell realms who explains all about what's going on down there. That's the most famous part of the story. But before it gets to that point, what you have is a situation where the daughter, a loving daughter, her mother has died. And even before that, it's described that the Brahmin woman lived during the semblance Dharma age, following the parinirvana of awakening, blossom, concentration, mastery king Tathagata. Here's Tathagata again. Yore. This is Yore in Sino-Korean. So this is during another Buddha, a different Buddha, a Buddha a long time ago, and that Buddha had already died and had been dead for since, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on. Let's keep track of the time. Semblance Dharma age means that at least 500 years and possibly 1,000 years or more has passed since this Buddha, the Buddha awakening, blossom, concentration, mastery king Tathagata. This Buddha had died at least 500 or possibly 1,000 or more years ago when this story takes place. And so, but since it was a semblance Dharma age, that means that people still had some semblance of the Dharma that had been taught by this Buddha. Not the pure teaching, not the fully correct teaching, but it hadn't declined completely. Now, this woman's mother had believed in false doctrines and often slighted the triple gem, basically. And it's sometimes described that her mother actually several times tried to practice Buddhism, at least the Buddhism that was available at the time, but always ended up losing faith. When her mother died, the daughter was very, very, very worried about the fate of her mother. And so she made lavish offerings to this Buddha, whose teaching still kind of existed. There were still monasteries, there were still temples and stupas. And so she went around to different temples and stupas and monasteries, making offerings and praying for her mother. And in one monastery, she saw an image of this long dead Buddha. And it occurred to her that if only, this Buddha were still alive, she would be able to ask this Buddha what had happened to her mother. This thought of if only if only this Buddha was still alive, became very strong in her mind. And after a while like this, she heard a voice. And the voice said, that it would tell her where her mother was. Now, she looks up into the sky. She says, "Who is this?" basically. And the voice says, "I am the one to whom you gaze reverently and pay obeisance. I am the past awakening, blossom, concentration, mastering king, Tathagata." And so I mentioned earlier that I want to go back and do a thematic summary of the whole sutra. This is a very important theme of this sutra, the continued presence of the Buddha even after passing into parinirvana, because that's what's happening here. The woman is thinking, "Oh, if only this Buddha was still around," and then he is still around. And then something very interesting happens. The woman has been going around to temples and monasteries and stupas making offerings. She has this vision, or it's an auditory. She hears this Buddha, and the Buddha tells her to finish her offerings and then go home and sit upright and meditate on my name. And then that's when the more famous part of the story happens, where she goes home and she sits in meditation. And this is an interesting phrase. This is not the most common phrase that one encounters in Zen for mediting. It's a combination of two characters. One, this first character, Dan, means upright. And the second one, Jua, is often associated with sitting meditation. This just means to sit, including sitting meditation, but anytime you sit down, this character can be used for the act of sitting. Dan Jua in particular means to sit upright, and it has a strong connotation. If you do just a Google search on these two characters, this is the kind of image that you'll find. People doing meditation. I really liked finding a, since this is a story about a woman who's praying for her mother, I thought it was interesting to find a picture of a woman, looks like she's wearing a business suit, practicing meditation. Very much like how the famous Brahmin woman might appear in this story. Sha Yu is a phrase that means it's meditate, basically. It's two characters that both mean contemplate. Put them together and you get a word that means meditate. This is just a word for I. It's a literary form for I. This is a word for possession, and this is a word for name. So this literally, I mean, this is a nice phrase in Chinese because it's very easy to correlate the actual meaning with the literal meaning of the characters. Sit upright, contemplate my name. And that's what she was instructed to do, and that's what she did, and that's when she went and had her great famous vision of all the hell realms. And so the culmination of the vision of all of the hell realms was that she's informed, because of your practice, because of all the offerings that you've made and the great devotion that you have to your mother, and your devotion to the Buddha, your mother is fine. She's no longer in hell. She was liberated a couple of days ago, as were all of the other people currently in hell. Okay, so that's it. As far as happy endings go, that story has a very happy ending. Now in chapter 2, this is another important theme in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, which is this whole business of emanations. So Ksitigarbha has not yet appeared in this sutra. Now what happens at the beginning of chapter 2 is that all of the various emanations, and this is a very nice word in Chinese that literally means separate bodies. So all of the different separate bodies of Ksitigarbha came together from throughout the universe and gathered together in Triastrimsa heaven. And and they're still all separate. And they also come along, each of these emanations of Ksitigarbha has a retinue of basically disciples, people who have become followers of Ksitigarbha, or to be more precise, who have become students of one of Ksitigarbha's many emanations or separate bodies in different parts of the universe. They've all traveled to Triastrimsa heaven with these different emanations. And Shakyamuni Buddha stretches out his golden arm to the many different emanations of Ksitigarbha and places his hand on the crowns of their heads. This is another phrase that shows up in many sutras. This is a common gesture of the Buddha, a gesture of affection and approval and encouragement to reach out and touch people on the head like this. And then Shakyamuni declares that he, just like Ksitigarbha, transforms into many different emanations. There's a woman, a man, a deva, a naga, a spirit, a ghost, a mountain, a forest, a stream, a river, a pond, a spring, a well, all to benefit people. And also, he says, but I'm not done. I can, Chakra, Brahma, these are all important figures from Hinduism, a wheel-turning king, a householder, a king, a high minister. And then he continues on for a while, and then he, just for emphasis, he says, it is not only in the form of a Buddha that I have manifested before sentient beings. And then, and only then, at this point, then all of these different emanations of Ksitigarbha gather together and into one form. And now Ksitigarbha, as a single bodhisattva, is now present in the assembly. And then Ksitigarbha speaks to the Buddha and says, do not be concerned about future living beings who have unwholesome karma. So here, what Ksitigarbha is saying is that, and so another thing about the setting of this sutra is it's taking place very late in the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, very near the time when he is going to die. And so one of the things that Ksitigarbha wants to do is to assure Shakyamuni Buddha that after Shakyamuni has entered into his parinirvana, that Ksitigarbha will always be there to help and guide and teach beings who have unwholesome karma. Because beings with unwholesome karma are the ones who need help and guidance and teaching the most. And then Shakyamuni Buddha says something very interesting. He says, I will help you joyfully, which is a nice four-character phrase in Chinese. The reason why this is interesting is because Ksitigarbha is telling the Buddha, after you die, after you're parinirvana, after you are gone, I'll take care of things. And the Buddha responds that after he has died, after his parinirvana, after he is gone, he will still be helping Ksitigarbha joyfully. Just as the Buddha in the past, in the story in the previous chapter, that Buddha was still around, even though he had passed into parinirvana, had died many hundreds of years before. Even though his teaching had passed into the semblance dharma stage, where it was no longer being taught and understood and practiced correctly, he was still around and still able to help beings. Let's see. Oh, all right. Now, I do want to get to this before we do a break. Yeah, this is a nice tie-in between the Lotus Sutra and the Ksitigarbha Sutra. The Lotus Sutra, particularly in the chapter on Avalokiteshvara. So Avalokiteshvara and Ksitigarbha are very closely related in many ways. One thing that's emphasized in the chapter on Avalokiteshvara in the Lotus Sutra is the many different forms in which she can appear. And in fact, that chapter is named for one of the specific forms of Avalokiteshvara, which is the universal gateway manifestation. And so this is a different word that's used. I pointed out before that the word that's being used and translated as emanation is this Chinese word that literally means separate body, okay? And it emphasizes the fact that all of these emanations exist all at the same time. In the Lotus Sutra, a different kind of emanation is, or a different way of talking about the same phenomenon is emphasized, where it's simply talking about different appearances. So this phrase which shows up when we do Kwanzaa Bosal chanting. So when we do Kwanzaa Bosal chanting, the fourth line in Kwanzaa Bosal chanting is Namu Bomun Shihyon Wolyok Hongshim Deja Debi, which is so prior to that, the first three lines of Kwanzaa Bosal chanting are homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha, which are not specifically about Avalokiteshvara or Kwanzaa Bosal. And then the fourth line is specifically about Kwanzaa Bosal, and it's not a direct quote from the Lotus Sutra. It's a reference to the Lotus Sutra. Namu Bomun Shihyon. Bomun Shihyon is the universal gate manifestation, which is the title of the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the universal gate manifestation of Avalokiteshvara. And then Wolyok Hongshim Deja Debi is just more characterizations of associated with Avalokiteshvara. Powerful vows are wide and deep, great love, great compassion. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. We'll do a break for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and pick up with this summary of the Ksitigarbha Sutra. Okay, I'm gonna keep sharing. Okay, so we're back, and more I could say about this particular slide, but I'm going to move on from that. Any questions or anything you want to bring up, or you know, again, feel free to interject at any time. Okay, there we go. All right, so the next slide. Moving on to chapter 3. Now, in chapter 3, Maya Devi, who is the Buddha's mother, she speaks. And she asks Ksitigarbha to describe the ripened effects experienced by beings in Jambudvipa prior to our different, due to our different karma. Okay, so karma is a really major theme of the Ksitigarbha Sutra. It's obviously a major theme in Buddhist teaching, but especially so in the Ksitigarbha Sutra. And one of the things that I will talk about when I get a more thematic summary of the sutra put together is that what the Ksitigarbha Sutra really emphasizes about karma is that karma is fungible. All right, that karma, you cannot escape from karma, but that you can influence it. That karma is not mechanistic or deterministic. That it is always possible for us to help to shape and determine the way in which our karma comes to fruition. It will come to fruition. You cannot escape from it, but we have a lot of ability to determine. First of all, the karma that comes to fruition is all due to our own past actions. So we already had that chance in the past when we committed whatever actions it were that created that karma. But even after that, even as the karma is coming into fruition, we still have a great deal that we can do to influence how it comes about. And as the Ksitigarbha Sutra will also explain, not only can we influence how our own karma comes to fruition, but we can help to influence how other people's karma comes to fruition, and other people can help to influence how our karma comes to fruition. And we'll get into some of that. But the most important thing to emphasize at first, however, is that, yeah, there's karma. Yeah, you can't get away with it. Get away from it. You can't get away with anything. And so Ksitigarbha then proceeds to answer Mayadevi's question by giving a fairly unpleasant listing of various bad actions and their consequences for people in their subsequent rebirths. And I want to skip right to the next slide and focus on what Ksitigarbha lists first when he's talking about the different types of offenses and the resulting afterlife punishments. The very first offense that he mentions is, trying to move this a little bit, yeah. Very first offense that he mentions is living beings who are not filial towards their parents. And so one of the reasons for the popularity of Ksitigarbha, and in particular the Ksitigarbha Sutra in East Asian cultures, is the emphasis in this sutra and in teachings associated with Ksitigarbha in general, the emphasis on family and filial, what's often called filial piety or filial duty. In fact, some people have suggested that there's so much emphasis on filial duty in the Ksitigarbha Sutra that it sounds to them like this sutra was actually written for a Chinese audience in order to win over people who are already very influenced by Confucianism, which has a very strong emphasis on filial duty, similar to the way that it's discussed in the Ksitigarbha Sutra. Personally, I don't necessarily believe that that's the case. It certainly is possible and even likely that the way that the sutra was translated and edited and possibly had things added to it or whatever could reflect this interest. Nevertheless, the way that filial duty is discussed in the Ksitigarbha Sutra is somewhat different from the way it's usually presented in Confucian teachings. Confucian teachings are often very much focused on the father figure and one's duty towards the father figure, and especially the duty of sons towards their fathers. Whereas the Ksitigarbha Sutra focuses very strongly on mothers, and in particular on the relationship between daughters and mothers. But it isn't just on mothers and daughters and mothers. There's a lot of emphasis on family in general, and especially the role of the family, both in terms of when a woman is pregnant, when she's giving birth, and when a child has first been born, as well as when people are getting old, people are dying, and people have died. Birth and death are very important, and the importance of family during those times. And it's worth returning to the story of the Brahmin woman in chapter 1. Her initial vision of the Buddha was while at a monastery. But the Buddha tells her to finish her practice there at the monastery and then to go and practice at home. And so not only is there a lot of emphasis in the Ksitigarbha Sutra on filial duty and familial relationships. Yeah, go ahead, Camille, say something.
I was just wondering, as you were talking, so like you mentioned how this idea that not this idea, but this concept that karma is impacted by others. Do you think a focus of the sutra is on the family because like that might be who's kind of shaping it, like when as individuals are growing up and kind of like who you are most often relating to? Do you think that could be a reason why it's a focus?
Yes, absolutely, and also because so there's a focus on that because you already have a strong connection with those people, with your family, and therefore it just makes sense that they can help you. I mean, it's not you don't need the teachings of the Buddha to know that people in your family can be very supportive. That's not always the case, but but ideally that's how it works. We receive a great deal of support from our family. Also, in terms of, in a lot of times in Buddhism, there's an emphasis on compassion for all, not only all human beings but all sentient beings. Whereas actually people are more likely to feel compassion for the people that they are already close to. And also, so we're more likely to feel compassion for the people that we're already close to, but we're also more likely to take for granted and to come into conflict with the people in our families and our friends and people that we are close to. So it's both a good place where we feel we should be nice or compassionate to people who are our friends and family, and we also have a lot to work on because we often aren't nice and compassionate with the people in our friends and our family, and that's really the place to start. So even in Buddhism, it's recognized that while we want to be compassionate for all sentient beings everywhere, you really have to start with the people that you are already have a relationship with. Yeah, and so and all of these relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships, this this in sometimes in a roundabout way, but also I think in an actually quite straightforward way, shows that the Ksitigarbha Sutra is really aimed at an audience of lay Buddhist practitioners. These are the people who have families. These are the people who have babies. These are the people who, the famous story of the Brahmin woman. She goes home to practice. She leaves the monastery and goes home to complete her practice. Anyway, so, and it's an important contrast. The setting of the Ksitigarbha Sutra is very kind of out there. It takes place in the heavenly realm. Most of the beings who are there are strange nagas and other ghost kings and so forth. But really, the audience and the people who are being who are intended to receive this teaching are lay people, lay practitioners of Buddhism. All right. Now the fourth chapter is did that kind of address what you wanted to get at, Camille? Okay, good. The fourth chapter is kind of a continuation of the third chapter, talking more about the karmic consequences in subsequent lifetimes that people experience. And let's see. Ksitigarbha says to the Buddha that he says that it is only because of the Buddha. Here's Buddha Tathagata together, the Buddha Tathagata. So just for emphasis, you can say both. Awesome spiritual powers. Only because of the Buddha Tathagata, that is Shakyamuni Buddha's awesome spiritual powers, that he, Ksitigarbha, is able to transform into many emanations to rescue beings from the ripened effects of karma. Now, this is what I'm talking about before, the fungibility of karma. And so I like the term fungible. It refers to the way that things have to be paid for, but the way in which things get paid for isn't always the same. Sometimes you can negotiate or work with getting things paid off if things are fungible. You can't just ignore things that are fungible, but you can work something out. And so that's what Ksitigarbha does. He helps people to get better results from their karma than they would have otherwise. And then he also states that now, and he's been doing this all along, but now he says, I have been entrusted by the Buddha to guide all beings in the 6 realms of existence until Ajita, that is Maitreya, that's another name for Maitreya, becomes a Buddha. And then Shakyamuni assures Ksitigarbha that he, Shakyamuni, has no reason to be concerned in the future. Okay, and then another character shows up, Concentration Mastery King. Says, what has Ksitigarbha done to earn so much praise from the Buddha? Okay, and then the Buddha tells another past life story. This is chapter 4, so there's 2 more past life stories about Ksitigarbha that are told in this chapter. And one of them refers to a let's see. I think I got this mixed up with another one. This is a chapter where the story is told of Ksitigarbha being a king and having a friend in the next kingdom over. One of them vowed to become a Buddha. His friend vowed to become a Buddha. Ksitigarbha vowed to become a Bodhisattva. I think I got confused and said that was in the first chapter. That was a different story in the first chapter. And then we get to yet another story about a mother and a daughter. The story of the Bodhisattva Bright Eyes, who is another previous life of Ksitigarbha, where he was the daughter of a mother who died and suffered a rebirth in a lower realm, but due to the prayers of her daughter, she was liberated from that. In this book, we were discussing actually before the recording started that I know Camille has now, and it's going to be the next book that we'll be reading. Jiru Ing, who is both a Buddhist scholar and professor, and also herself a Buddhist nun. She provides a really nice summary of all 4 of the past life stories of Ksitigarbha that are told in the sutra. And I'm going to move on from this. This is nice. This is just a direct quote from her book, starting on page 108. Really encourage people to read that. Yes. Names play a really important role in the Ksitigarbha Sutra. And in this chapter, so in chapters 3 and 4, actually in chapters 1, can't remember if there was in 2, but chapter 1 and chapter 3 and chapter 4 spend a lot of time talking about hell realms. And chapter 5 kind of doubles down on that. And also introduces Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. And he asked to speak about the names of the hells. And so, which Ksitigarbha then proceeds to talk about lots of different hell realms, flying knives, teeth sawing, burning hands, and then after giving the names of the hell realms, Samantabhadra asks Ksitigarbha to describe the actual torments experienced in these hells. Again, and this is one of the important things about this chapter. This chapter is the first time that the term Dharma declining age is introduced, and this is another concept that's closely associated with Ksitigarbha. And so the reason why Samantabhadra is asking these questions about the names of hells and the terrible things that happen to people in hell realms is for the benefit of people in future Dharma declining age who will hear about these terrible things that happen and will straighten up and fly right, I guess, because of it. Anyway, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what is the Dharma ending age or the Dharma declining age. These 3 ages of the Dharma. It's pretty straightforward, but it's a very important. It's an important idea that people make use of in many different ways. Usually, people assume, and this has been the case for many hundreds and even thousands of years, that we're living in the Dharma ending age. And the Dharma ending age is defined by the teachings having begun to disappear completely, whole teaching lines dying out, good results are very difficult, almost impossible to attain, and enlightenment becomes only a very remote, faint possibility, if even that. And so there's a lot of confusion about what the correct teachings are. There's a lot of confusion about how people should practice. And there's also little evidence that anybody's making progress, let alone getting enlightened. And people have a tendency to feel like that's the way it is. People have a tendency to feel like that's the way it is today. People had a tendency to feel like that's the way it was well over 1,000 years ago in China. Now, in the story of the famous story of the Brahmin woman, she lived during the Dharma semblance age, and that's a time when it's long after a Buddha has died, and the teachings are still around, but many teachings have been ignored or even forgotten completely, and people's practices are starting to become, a little iffy. Good results are difficult to attain. Enlightenment becomes increasingly rare. It's not as bad as the Dharma declining age, where the Dharma declining age is always defined in terms of the Dharma is almost, but not completely gone. And actually, many teachers have many teachers have taught that it's really up to us to determine which of these ages we are going to live in. Are we going to, just let the Dharma die with us? Are we going to kind of practice the Dharma kind of, in a way that is incomplete and half-hearted? Or are we going to make the Dharma alive in ourselves, in our own practice? So the teaching of the Dharma ending age is often used as a way of motivating people, just like and just as the idea of hell realms and all the punishments that people can expect in hell realms is often used to literally to scare people, but to get people's attention, because after all, the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. And the reason why the first very first teaching the Buddha gave was the teaching on the truth of suffering, is because we go about our lives pretending that there isn't suffering, pretending that we are getting away with things, pretending that we aren't accumulating bad karma, and we need to be reminded of the truth. Okay, and so, and also, this is just a really interesting topic in general. People, in the history of Buddhism, there have been many charismatic leaders who have come along and who have proclaimed, we are living in the Dharma ending age, and the only way that we can be saved is by fill in the blank. And usually it means the only way we can be saved is by following that particular charismatic leader. And that usually ends up the way you would expect it to. Millenarianism, I think that's the right way of pronouncing it, is a common occurrence in many different religions, and Buddhism is no exception. And one thing that makes it even more complicated is that in the history of Buddhism in China, China and East Asia in general, these cults of people who declare that we are living in a Dharma ending age often are directed at are often mass movements that have very strong backing from the lowest and the poorest and the most dispossessed elements of society, and it's directed at setting right injustices and inequalities in society. So, which makes it even more interesting, in my opinion. Anyway, all right. So, chapter 6 is okay. Good. Chapter 6 is the praise of the Tathagata. And so this is praise of the Tathagata, that is, the Tathagata, Shakyamuni Buddha, is praising Ksitigarbha, which he has already done in the sutra, but this chapter specifically emphasizes the praise that Shakyamuni has of Ksitigarbha. And it also introduces yet another character, universally vast, Bodhisattva. And it also, again, as was in the last chapter, introduces this concept of for the sake of living beings in the age of the declining Dharma in the future, to describe the great merits and the virtues of Ksitigarbha and how he benefits humans and devas. Let's see. Various practices. Oh yeah, and so this is even though up to this point it's a repetition of many things that have already been said in the sutra. This chapter starts to get more into specifics about different types of practices that people can do. Reciting the Bodhisattva's name 10,000 times. And it also talks about different types of people and different types of practices. I mean, and it's interesting that it specifically mentions women, people with severe illnesses, slaves, and anyone else without freedom, parents of newborn children, and so forth. All people who in very, very, very different situations. And like I said before, these are all people who are lay persons. This is not talking about practices for monks and nuns. This is talking about practices for lay people, including lay people in very difficult situations. Yeah, and if any being simply hears the Bodhisattva's name, this is another recurring theme: the importance of names. So in the chapter on the hells, there was a lot of emphasis just on the names of the hells. So name, and in the very first chapter, the story about the Brahmin woman who was able to liberate her mother from hell. The instruction that she received from the Buddha was to sit upright and contemplate my name. And that's what we do when we chant Jijang Bosal, or Kwansin Bosal, or other people just recite Nembutsu, or Namu Amida Bull, or whatever. The contemplation of the name of a Buddha is a time-tested and very powerful meditation technique. Okay, if any being simply hears the Bodhisattva's name, sees his image, here's just 3 words of the sutra. They will experience great happiness and good fortune in this and future lives. And again, another thing that's important to emphasize here is that this isn't just talking about making spiritual progress, understanding the true nature of emptiness. This is also saying you will experience great happiness and good fortune. Okay, it's very clear in this sutra that it is both promoting the idea that you will get that you will get happiness and good fortune, but the ultimate goal is to save all beings. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then again on the subject of names, universally vast Bodhisattva asked the Buddha how the sutra should be named, and so there's actually 3 different names of the sutra that are given inside the sutra. The name that is usually attributed or usually used is the original vows of Ksitigarbha, which is actually Ksitigarbha Jijang, original vows. And here's like a key to the different Chinese. There's only a few characters that show up in these 3 different alternative titles. And the original practices of Ksitigarbha is also, so there's a lot of emphasis not just on the vows, that is the aspiration of Ksitigarbha. There's also a lot of emphasis in the sutra on the practices of Ksitigarbha, the action of Ksitigarbha. And then a final alternative is just to add the word power in, the power of the original vows of Ksitigarbha. So it's kind of interesting that 3 different names are given, and the different characters that are used are all kind of good characters for anybody who's interested in Buddhism and has any interest in learning a little bit about Chinese characters and how they're used in Chinese Buddhism. All right, so chapter 7. Let's see how many. Oh yeah, I got 2 slides on chapter 7. Let's see if I can get through those. Oh yeah, so this is another really important theme or theme in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, which is basically talking about the beings of Jambudvipa, which is where we live. Jambudvipa is more or less Earth and its immediate surroundings. It is the realm where humans and animals and the beings that we're familiar with live. And beings in Jambudvipa have very difficult karma. Even when they do manage to generate some virtuous benefits, they usually retreat from their initial resolve. And if they encounter evil conditions, with every thought they add to the evil. And this is let's see, did I do a slide on this? I didn't get around to that. In the Kanzeon chant, we chant Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yobutu and Yobutu and Buboso and Jo Rakugajo Joning. Kanzeon Bonin, Kanzeon Nennen Jushin Ki Nennen Fudi Shin. Nennen, this is thought after thought. And so this is a very nice phrase in Chinese. This means thought after thought, nen, nen. And then this just means increase evil. So when we encounter difficulty, we make it worse. That's what it's saying. And then Ksitigarbha gives a very there's some really nice famous similes that are come from the sutra. It's like a person walking in mud carrying heavy rocks, but then you encounter a virtuous friend. This is another theme of the sutra as well. A virtuous friend who lightens or even completely removes the burden. The friend will also guide you to solid level ground and finally admonishes you to avoid the bad road and not walk on it again. Then Ksitigarbha describes how when someone is about to die, family members should create merit in order to assist the one dying on the road ahead. Many different specific actions are recommended, including hanging banners, lighting lamps, reciting sutras, etc. Particularly recommended is the recitation of the names of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Pratyeka Buddhas, so that the names will be heard in the fundamental consciousness of the dying one. If the departed's loved ones engage in such meritorious actions for 49 days after the death, then the deceased will never be reborn in the lower realms, and the relatives will themselves benefit greatly. Then Ksitigarbha exhorts all beings in Jambudvipa to not engage in non-virtuous behavior, especially when a loved one is dying or has recently died. So there's a lot that's packed into it. There's a lot that's packed into this. This goes back to what we were talking about before, about how we can help someone who is dying or who has died. When someone is dying, it's very helpful for them to hear others chanting the names of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Pratyeka Buddhas. And then even after they've died, it's very helpful to engage in meritorious actions. So, and there's more to be said in the later on in the sutra about what kind of actions to take place in, and a lot of detail has been filled in, not only by what's in the sutra, but by different practices and rituals that have been developed over the years, over the centuries. Oh yeah. Then an elder named Great Eloquence asked Ksitigarbha if beings in Jambudvipa can benefit greatly from the virtuous acts done on their behalf by others. So this is a really specific question, and this is a really important question. And of course, we know in our daily lives that we get help from others, and we also know that it is possible at times to help others. And so this is just extending that into. This is just putting an emphasis on that, but also extending it into the realm of what can you do for someone who is dying or who has died. And it is now 8:14, and let me just finish this slide, and then we'll end, or whatever discussion people want to continue having, we'll do. But I just want to finish this slide. Ksitigarbha replies that anyone who hears the name, this is a repetition, of a Buddha, Bodhisattva, or Pratyeka Buddha when they are approaching death will benefit greatly, regardless of their previous wrongdoing. And Ksitigarbha also reiterates that there will also be great benefit for those still living who engage in virtuous acts on behalf of the dying and the dead. And then, yeah. So the great ghost of impermanence can come to one at any time, which is a great little reminder. The great ghost of impermanence can come to one at any time. Ksitigarbha warns. Ksitigarbha then describes how the consciousness wanders in darkness during the 49-day period after death, tormented by thousands of myriads of worries. All the time the departed one is hoping that the still living will engender the strength of merit to rescue him or her. Finally, Ksitigarbha emphasizes that the virtuous actions on behalf of the departed must be enacted meticulously. If it is done with diligence and with a resolute mind, there will be great benefit for both the living and the dead. And it's nice to emphasize that is the title of this chapter, benefiting the living and the dead. That when you engage in practices to help those who have died, you're also helping yourself. All right. So I am going to stop sharing at this point. Ask for any questions or comments, or is this helpful? I hope. I don't know. It's we next time we meet, I'll continue on with the rest of the sutra, but because we've only gone through the first 7 chapters. There's 13 in total. But I also do want to make the next class be kind of emphasize more of the themes. And if people have themes or ideas that they want to emphasize in our last discussion on the sutra, please let me know, or bring that with you to the class. Okay. We can at this point. Let me see if I can find. Yeah. So we'll end with the 4 great vows. Oh, there it is. Good. I'm going to share my screen again. And we will end with the 4 great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. Teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Thanks for coming,
Bye. Thank you.
and see you soon. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.